Into the menopause, what women often describe as a symptom is an absolute bone-crushing fatigue. And it can hit them like a bus.
Hi Christine, I went to your talk this morning, it was fantastic. And I suppose my three main takeaways I just wanted to have a little chat with you about. And the first one is just about how menopause causes some limiting factors or barriers to women getting into exercise. And I suppose the two big factors that came up were fatigue and issues around pelvic floor and pelvic control, bowel and bladder control. And I suppose if you've got any more information and any tips on women who might be struggling getting started with exercise around those areas and sort of strategies for them to help take their first steps into exercise and strength training.
Sure, well, first of all, thanks for coming, because I think you count about only 6 men in the audience. So you are in a minority, so really happy you were there. Shall we start with fatigue?
Yes.
Because I think into the menopause, what women often describe as a symptom is an absolute bone-crushing fatigue. And it can hit them like a bus. And of course, that's not very compatible with exercise. Sleep can also be impacted. That's the basic, really, the biggest change in the menopause, if we sort of forget for a moment about progesterone or testosterone, is the change in estrogen, which is our main female reproductive hormone. In the perimenopause, it starts fluctuating, and then it flatlines after the postmenopausal, and then it never comes back, and then you're postmenopausal for the rest of your whole life. Obviously, in that time of fluctuation, it's a very complex time, because if you give a 3-year-old a crayon and ask them to draw a graph, that's what your estrogen is doing. Basically, that's so estrogen is an anabolic steroid, so it's anabolic in its signaling, meaning that it's part of our recovery and rebuilding. So it's pretty cruel in a way that we lose that ability. And at the same time, there are a lot of solutions, and there's no need for women to struggle. We like to compare estrogen like what's to the garden. And if you sort of follow that garden analogy, we just need more water. We need more water in the garden. That's a real slightly reductionist, simple analogy, really. So other women can still exercise, and if anything, and we'll talk about it in a minute as well, high intensity and strength training becomes more important. Recovery really matters.
Okay.
So we do need to recover more.
Yeah.
So sleep, like I said in the talk this morning, I give all women permission to claim their sleep and be fairly pedantic about it. Tell your family, your partners, you've got to sleep. Basically, we get fitter when we sleep. When we exercise, we recover in our sleep. That's when our anabolic process is most effective.
Right, yeah.
Which is very challenging to menopause, because we do lose a lot of our sleep as well, especially if you can imagine if you have hot flushes, if you've got night sweats, none of those things promote sleep. Anxiety is one of the main symptoms of the menopause, also doesn't promote sleep. So apart from being more fatigued, all those elements play a part as well, so it's a pretty perfect storm. At the same time, with a review of life and starting to think more about rest and recovery, we can find solutions around that fatigue component.
And, excuse my ignorance a bit, is the sleep going to help the levels of estrogen, or is this estrogen, to improve the levels of estrogen, is it hormone therapy and other supplements effectively?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good question, I think. No, the estrogen, you can't improve your estrogen. The estrogen, it can be impacted by stress, but really the menopause itself and the fact that your ovaries stop ovulating, producing estrogen, that is the main impact. Everything else, of course, stress reduction, all those things may help a little bit and producing less of a stress response, but that's all minimal compared to what your body reproductively is doing. And also, we can't just take stress out of people's life. We can't say, don't be so stressed. It doesn't sit very well with most people, because, life continues even when you go through the menopause. So hormone therapy absolutely does work for anxiety, for hot flushes, and the first line of treatment for preventing of osteoporosis. Obviously, bone density is a big part of your work and what you promote as well. And now in all the guidelines, it really is very clearly recommended as a first line treatment for the prevention of osteoporosis. But that would be with hormone therapy.
And then back to the fatigue, I found through some of the women that I work with that they've not necessarily come into wanting to start strength training with any expectations of improving their fatigue levels, but as a result, they found that actually they've had less fatigue, sleeping better. Is that something you found, or the research?
Absolutely, because increasing that lean muscle mass is absolutely key. First of all, it helps mental health. With mental health, you sleep better. It helps the stress response. So on so many different levels, increased muscle mass, metabolically they will be healthier. Their blood sugars will be more stable. The only thing that exercise hasn't got very strong evidence for is improving night sweats and hot flushes. But it does improve sleep, in particularly high intensity exercise.
With women who face concerns about bladder control
Yes.
during particularly strength training where there's a bit more intra-abdominal pressure, have you got any strategies that women can help to make themselves feel more comfortable in order to actually make steps forwards?
Absolutely. So pelvic floor muscle training has got a very high level of evidence. It really works. We don't think it's good for you. We know it is. So it's well trialed. The strongest level of evidence there probably is what most medication and most surgery doesn't get to. But there's a real problem. And pelvic floor muscle training helps for bladder control and prolapse control. There's a huge problem with pelvic floor muscle training. It's incredibly boring. So compliance is actually the hardest thing. So I always explain the level of evidence to my patients and how well it does work, but actually compliance, most pelvic floor physios, pelvic health physios don't do their pelvic floor exercises.
You mentioned an app in your talk.
Yes, so that the one thing to do is download the Squeezy app. It's NHS endorsed. It costs about $2.99, but then you got it for the rest of your life. It's a really good motivator. It tells you what to do, tells you how to do it. And at the same time, if after 3 months that hasn't worked, go and seek help.
Yeah.
Because I've seen too many women that do the app for 3 months and say, that didn't work. Oh, well, that's it. I will just leak for the rest of my life. That's not the case. Then you need a specialized person, a pelvic health physio or another healthcare professional that can help out.
And what's your favorite cue for women to engage their pelvic floor?
Yeah. In itself, I haven't got a favorite. When I treat, and especially because I do a lot of diagnostic scanning, I ask women to think of different things, and we come up with the strangest cues.
And what was I'm leading the question.
The leading, that's right. So there was a study that showed that for most women, if they think about the back passage, about sphincter control, it works best. So imagine being in a very quiet room, pin is dropping, and you need to pass wind, and you've got to control it. And that actually, because 2/3 of your pelvic floor muscles sit behind the rectum. So anatomically, that makes sense as well. Not for all women, for most women that works. But also really important at one point to let it go again. So we also don't want an overactive pelvic floor. We want a reactive, bouncy pelvic floor. It's a little bit like you are an MSK physio. When you're walking down the road, you don't want to keep your knee completely straight. You need a little bend to shock absorb. And the pelvic floor is exactly the same. You need a bit of bounciness to shock absorb, and that's often in treatment what we need to teach women that leak when they exercise as well. They start holding so much, or they might be too long and too weak, and then we need to increase muscle bulk, and it can be done. Most women can be helped.
Makes sense. And then the other key takeaway I took was the combination of strength training, high intensity training, and nutrition. I suppose one of the common mistakes I see people make is they've experienced a little bit of weight gain during menopause, and the same time they start strength training or a new exercise program, they become very restricted with their diet. And I'd like to say a few words about that and any strategies that you want.
And obviously, I'm not a dietitian, nutritionist, but part of our expert team, we've got a dietitian and a nutritionist, so I listen to them quite a lot. So I'm sure they'll be happy for me to share some of their sort of low-hanging fruit, really. It breaks my heart that women put themselves on restricted diets. In the sort of the fasting diet might work for some, and that's fantastic, but really it's probably the worst designed diet for a menopausal woman, because our blood sugars are already less stable, and it's harder to find our blood sugars to have energy. So all that will lead to, like a fasting diet for most women, is low energy availability. And like we just talked about, you already have fatigue. So really, it's kind of, and also often it's punitive and restrictive. rather than, so often women actually have to eat more and exercise more. And the eating more is very much around 3 main meals a day. This is the real simple stuff. And every meal needs to have protein in it. So increase your protein. It still have carbs as well. You need your energy. Why would you want to end up with low energy availability? Because all that will happen is your blood sugars will drop, your body interprets that as stress. Your body doesn't know the difference between emotional stress and stress because of low blood sugar levels. And if you're stressed and fatigued, you're not going to reach out for a green salad. You'll go to the fridge and kind of eat anything that you can you can find. So keep those blood sugar levels stable by having 3 main meals a day with protein and carbs, and of course with fat, good fats as well, and 2 snacks that also include proteins. So you keep, actually, if anything, eating more regularly, so you don't get those big dips. You just keep going, and I think for most women that would work. And the other thing I just would like to throw in, that we do get a little bit of more visceral fat, and that is a fact. So there's a change in body composition, and some of that is also celebrate a beautiful rounded belly. You know, into the menopause, not many women have a straight six-pack, and the effort and the punitive measures you would have to take to achieve that. And I love the theory of that if your estrogen goes down, belly fat has a little bit of estrone. It's a different type of estrogen. So in a way, your body's being protective. It's actually really smart. It tries to create this homeostasis of, oh yeah, you know, let's just put it here so you still have a bit of estrogen. So also give our body a bit of credit for what it does, rather than kind of tear it apart and be unhappy with it.
Yes. So for anyone who's completely new to exercise and also coming into menopause, have you got any advice on the first steps someone should take and what they should focus on?
Yeah, I think that can be really challenging for a lot of women, especially if they already feel overwhelmed by the menopause and at times short. So there are lots of barriers. Women in Sport did a lovely bit of research, which is worth checking out. And they also did a small trial with people that got certain support and see what worked. And really what works the best for women that are reluctant exercisers and don't have the confidence to exercise is first widen their frame of exercise. You don't have to go to the gym if that isn't right for you. Start going for a walk, and do start with 10 minutes, although 10 minutes isn't enough, but it's a start and it's better than nothing. The really good news is, if you've never done anything before, the initial benefits are huge. You know, it's that curve. And it's like the marginal efficiency, the benefits, so it becomes less. And so it's great in the beginning that you potentially feel so much better, and make it a social occasion. The women that did well in that program are the ones that did it with friends, or they had a buddy, they had some accountability. So see if there's a social structure. Go to a park, run, but that's also not for everyone. But it can be walking football, it can be netball. No, it doesn't always have to be gym. It can be yoga. It can be a whole range of things. And we do a lot of work with Places Leisure, and they nearly have a leisure centre in nearly every place in the UK. And they're doing a lot of very good menopause programs where women can start to try 12 different things, and they've got a support group around it as well. So ask your local GP, go to your local library and see what there is locally, because locally there's a lot of good stuff going on. But don't think you have to go to the gym if you really don't want to do it. There are many different ways, and at the same time you've got to get stronger. The benefit of strength, and don't be scared to increase the activity. Even with some joint pains, they actually will become less the stronger you get.
And I'd add to that, it's the strength where it doesn't have to be done in a gym. It can be done at home.
Exactly.
With things like bottles of water and a rucksack, and there's lots of ways of creating weights.
Yeah.
Eventually you might move on to that. But yeah, definitely a barrier there.
Yeah, and that's where programs like yours come in. It's just to really lower the threshold. You know, take some of the barriers away, because most women are terrified about going to a gym because they think they're too fat or not fit enough. Or if you look at that bit of research, there are also reasons why they wouldn't go.
The fear of being judged.
Exactly.
Not getting on equipment.
That's right. All those things. Yeah.
I've got to get there. Whereas home is a lot easier.
But that research also showed, and that is an optimistic way of looking at it, nearly all women had the desire to be fit and healthy. So the desire is there. It's just that the barriers are high, and that's what we've got to work on.
So obviously we focus a bit more on the barriers to getting started, how hard it might be, the fatigue levels. We said we painted a bit of a bleak picture.
Yeah.
Just like to try and flip that around a bit. And what would you say to someone who is feeling really low about it right now and is scared to get started?
Yeah.
What's the future? What could it look like for them?
Well, I suppose in terms of my personal story, I'm a pelvic health physio, and I was surprised by the menopause. That took me by surprise, which just shows, as a pelvic health physio, you'd think I'd be prepared. At the same time, now I'm postmenopausal, it's probably the best time of my life. So there's absolute hope. And I think for a lot of women, it's also time to reinvent themselves, to take a review, to think, actually take stock, a bit of whatever you, life laundry or whatever you want to call it, and say, okay, I'm going to sleep more, I am going to exercise more, I'm going to start self-care, and all those different things. So if it's a more colourful, supported structure where we all are aware and we know what's happening, and at the same time, hormone treatments can really make a difference to women. Strength training. I don't know, the Live More trial is still one of my favorite trials. Where women with severe osteoporosis start lifting weight and they turn their life around, and suddenly we're doing deadlifts, and some of them are in their 80s. So it's never too late. And like I said this morning, this 96-year-old with bladder issues, we started her on topical vaginal estrogen, and she couldn't go out on a mobility scooter. Now she can zoom around again for 2 or 3 hours. So it's never too late, and there absolutely is hope and reasons for optimism. And also we're lucky to still be alive and be able to kind of experience it.
Well, thanks, Christine. That's really helpful. Thanks for talking to us.
Well, thanks for inviting. Hey, thank you.